Hello, welcome to Uncommon Leadership. I'm Michael Hunter with Uncommon Teams. Today I'm talking with Colleen Johnson. Colleen has been working in the technology space for over 20 years, with half of that focused on improving the way we deliver value. She has taught and presented agile concepts to audiences around the world, but is happiest in the Colorado mountains with her husband and 3 kids. Welcome, Colleen.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
Happy to have you here today. In your journey to seeing people as people and learning to leverage their unique gifts to best accomplish your goals, what has been your biggest struggle?
Okay. Well, um, I'm the CEO of prokanban.org and have spent a lot of my career coaching and teaching Kanban at all levels of the organization. And, I think one of the places where we get stuck a lot is in this concept of swarming. A lot of the simulations and a lot of the ways that we teach Kanban really do encourage you to have a conversation about how you can swarm the work, right? Is it blocked? Let's swarm it. Is it aging? Let's swarm it. Or go swarm on something before you pull in new work. But I maybe in an ideal world, that's how we would love to see teams operate, but it's not always the reality, right? We do hire for specialization in a lot of teams. And I've even been in organizations where I've had a CTO tell me, I hire developers to develop. I don't want them doing testing, right? We have testers to test. And my gut reaction earlier in my career would have been to fight that and to say we can all learn from each other and let's pair and let's work on these things together. But I think I've shifted my stance with that quite a bit over the years of coaching and teaching to be more about respect for people and respect for your peers on your team. When we think about how work moves through a team, and especially if you're in a pull-based system, it's not so much about whether or not you are capable or willing to swarm or pair on something to get it unblocked or to get it to done, but it's more about not creating a pile of work that somebody else on your team is going to have to catch up with, right? That's stressful, and it means that we end up rushing and moving quickly to try to alleviate that pile wherever it is, right? And I think we see it most often if you have dedicated QA roles. It tends to be whatever that step is between dev and QA, right? We've got often more developers than we have QA folks, and if we're working in sprints, that tends to get pushed to the very end. And so I think one of the hardest things for me in seeing that was moving away, I guess, from pushing so hard on teams to swarm, and kind of switching my stance to say, it's not about that everybody has to be good at everything and everybody has to be able to do every function on this team or every activity on this team. But what it's more about is respecting your teammates and not adding to a growing pile of work that we can't keep pace with. And sometimes that means not starting something new.
What was hard to you about making that shift?
Well, I guess I would rather see a team just be willing to jump in and swarm. I think that's what, when we think about how teams work together, that's what we would love to see happen. I've been doing a lot of coaching work with security teams over the years. And I mean, that's a great example where there's such a high degree of specialization. It's not easy to say this team with this function is going to share work, because you might have somebody who specializes in development work. You might have somebody who specializes in risk and compliance. And you might have a security team here, but they're not delivering work together where they can all contribute equally to everything on the board. And so I think it's just taken watching some of the different applications for me to see that when we think about those things, it might seem a little altruistic, I guess, to say I want everybody on the team to be able to contribute together. But the reality of how teams are brought together and how their skills are brought together to deliver value in real life just varies.
Was part of the challenge for you letting go of that altruism?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would love to see it, like I said, I would love to see teams that can swarm. If you can swarm, you should. But I think it is hard sometimes for people to step into a different role. And even though we would coach, maybe like if instead of pulling new work in to a development column, go help a tester test. But there's a cost, right, of context switching, even for a function that way or a specialization that way. And in the same way, we would say we don't want to see a lot of context switching across work on the board that's in progress. I think it's backing away, I guess, from some of those things that seem easy on paper, but harder in practice.
Especially depending on the people you have on the team. Some people love being generalists, and so they'd be happy to switch between dev and test and security and release and whatever else. Other people just really just want to write code or find all the places the code is broken, and making them do the other things isn't optimal for anyone. They get grumpy, they don't work as well as they would otherwise.
Right. Yeah, that's very true. And then you're kind of creating a different problem, right? Where you may have people doing a lackluster job of the tasks you're asking them to do because they're not very engaged or enthusiastic about jumping around and trying to be more of a generalist. I think in software, well, not just software, probably every field, right? We say yes to everything, and we want to be a good team player and a good contributor to our team. And so I think if you go back to that lean concept of respect for people, it's really about understanding the impacts too of pulling new work in. And that's where when I'm working with teams, especially if we've gone through any kind of Kanban simulation where that becomes the hot button topic of we can't all jump around. And what are you saying? You want me to just sit there with no work to do if I can't contribute to something that's on the board? And it's like, I'm sure you could do some research or review tickets or for things that are in the backlog. But what we're really asking is that you don't screw over one of your teammates by pulling in a bunch of new stuff. I'm probably hypersensitive to it. I started out in QA as well, and I feel like more waterfall based projects back then, but I would spend 9 months of the year playing ping pong and then 3 months of the year panicking, trying to get some big project out the door at the last minute. And if you think about that, I mean, even our sprints ends up that way sometimes, where at the beginning of the sprint, there's not a lot of work for testing folks. And at the end of the sprint, there's a rush to get everything over the finish line. And unfortunately, for a lot of teams, that means development goes and starts on new work for the next sprint. And we end up with those offset cadences where we're not really working together anyway.
Yes, and that's really difficult to balance within a team and across teams. I've seen similar situations at a larger scope where everyone who's done with all the work for this release gets to start on the next release, and everyone who is still finishing up gets to keep working on the current release. And that means a couple sprints down the road, some of the teams are already almost ready to release again, while other teams are still haven't got that last release out the door.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think about the way we're trying to encourage collaboration and the way that we deliver, we break that down the minute we let that happen. But I think some of that pressure, I think, often comes from the culture of the organization to keep everybody utilized, right? We're focused more on keeping everybody busy instead of what value we're delivering. And I think if you can start to shift that focus in an organization to be more about value, then there feels like there's less pressure for everybody to stay busy all the time and end up in that scenario you just described where, my individual contribution is done. So I'm going to go find something else to keep myself busy, even though we may not have delivered any value as a team yet.
How do you help teams make that shift to prioritizing the team productivity over individual productivity?
Typically through trying to make a lot of flow metrics more visible. I think one of the things, we from a flow metrics perspective, probably one of the most underutilized data points you could put in front of a team is the work item age, which just is how old is this ticket that's in progress. And that works at every level of work item, right? If it works for customer support tickets or help desk tickets, it's going to work for epics and features. But a lot of times when we can see how old things are that are in progress, it's going to make us stop and say, wait, should I pull something new in if this feature's been in progress for 90 days? Maybe we need to do something to address why that's continuing to age. And if it's aging in progress, then it means that we haven't delivered any value there yet. So I think that's the other piece, is it really starts to be kind of a driver for the team to take action, at any level, to say, what are we going to do to get this thing out the door instead of pulling new work in? And for, I think a lot of teams, that can be a more powerful place to start than even putting WIP limits on the board. I see a lot of teams really push back on WIP limits because they feel like, well, I could do more work, right? I need to stay busy. I don't want to not have work to do. But if we could see how old stuff is that's already in progress, and there's a cost there, right? There's a cost that we haven't had a return on value yet. Take that feature. If there's a feature that's been in progress 90 days, there's a sunk cost that we haven't had any return on until that gets deployed and put in front of a customer. So how do we do that sooner? So I like to make work item age visible. Most of the tools we use suck at this. They're just really not very good at making that visible in a clear way. And, for a lot of teams, I'll have them just put the date the ticket started or the date the feature started in the title so that you can see it on the board and, start to have a conversation about the oldest items first.
What are the signals that typically tell you this item is too old, or
Yeah.
items are getting old enough that the system is stuck somehow?
Past data can typically be a great place to start there. So looking at your cycle time data to say, how long does it typically take for us to finish work? I think you have to be really careful, though. Averages are probably going to lead you a little bit astray here because you'll be wrong about half the time. What's the line? Plans based on average fail on average, right? So if we are planning based off on average, we're probably going to miss the mark. But if you have tools available that will give you the ability to see different percentiles for your past cycle time, that's a great place to start to set what that threshold is for your team. And from a Kanban perspective, we use the term service level expectation, or SLE. We use expectation instead of agreement, because agreement kind of implies that the customer's on board with that time too, which might not be the case. And an expectation is really the team's expectation for how long things will take, and becomes a way for them to manage the work that's in progress. So if you have the ability to look at your cycle time data and start to look at percentiles across that data, so that you could say 70% of our work takes 8 days or less, 80% of our work takes 12 days or less, maybe we're going to come in somewhere in the middle as a team and say, we don't want anything to take 10 days or less for this team. And we know that that's our signal that we need to do something different. But I think there's kind of a part two to setting a great SLE. And I think that's deciding as a team what you're going to do about it. I see a lot of teams set SLEs and post them, they'll have them in Jira on a ticket, or they'll have them in Kanbanize so that you could track your work against that SLE or that signal. But you end up with all the little red dots across the bottom of your ticket, or you end up with all the signals flashing that things are aging and nothing changes. And so I think it's really important to set some working agreements as a team first. Like, could be things like, we're going to swarm it. We're going to stop and inspect whether or not it's still valuable. Maybe we'll split that story, so part of it can move forward and the rest can go back to the backlog. Maybe it was too big to enter the system in the first place. But we have a tendency with, I think, a lot of those visual cues in our boards. They're there, they're available. They're telling us there's a problem, but we don't have a plan in place as a team to do anything about it yet. So I think you need both.
When you experience teams that you're working with being stuck, do you have a favorite tool or technique that you often go to first to help jiggle them loose?
Like stuck with delivery?
Or stuck in whatever they're trying to change?
Yeah. Um, I think I try to approach a lot of change at the team level always as an experiment. And I think positioning any change as something where we're going to try it and it doesn't have to stay this way is a little less threatening than saying we're going to change our process or we're going to change our workflow or we're going to change our tool, right? To just say everything can stay exactly the same as what we're doing now, but we're going to test this thing out and trying to have a really clear expectation for what does success look like. I think we've created a great culture in the agile space of running experiments, but I don't think we do a great job of saying what does good look like or why would we abandon this. What are the criteria for what a failure looks like? And so, if we said, hey team, we're going to try putting WIP limits in place, and here's what we would expect to see as a result of putting WIP limits in place, here's how we'll know it's working and that it's a worthwhile investment for us to keep doing. But if we don't see that, then let's not keep doing it, right? Or let's try a different number for WIP limits. And I think, we're busy. Everybody's busy doing other things too. So it's like, how do you make sure that you have those conversations before you start trying different things out? And then I would say the other piece in terms of change is that I always really try to understand where the team's pain is right now, whether that's with a survey or retro data or just interviews with team members, because I think um, after years and years of coaching and consulting, I hear a lot from teams when we get brought in to help them do something different. Why do we have to do this in a different way? What we were doing before wasn't broken. But they may have a very different list about what wasn't working or what is broken. And if I can understand that, I think I can help have a better conversation about what changes might help them with their specific pain. But if it feels like it's a one size fits all solution that's just being shoved down everyone's throats, I think you always kind of meet resistance. And so trying to understand their pain so that you can have a conversation about the changes that will really hopefully show improvement for how they're working.
How do you handle those situations where management is, or someone is forcing a change on the team, and the team is just like, this is not the change we need?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends a lot on what the change is. I would try to push back on the leader first if I thought it wasn't the right thing for the teams, or try to push back in a way to say, can this be something the teams get to opt into? Or that we run with one or two teams to see if it's working first for them before trying to one size fits all approach to everything. But I think with a lot of things, that the idea that you like layer in some change without taking something away is a great place to start, even if it's something that's mandated. And I see, as flow metrics and forecasting are becoming more popular in organizations, I know a lot of places are trying to move away from story pointing, and that's a great example. Some teams are ecstatic to not do story pointing anymore. Some teams really like it. They like the conversation, or they like the pointing process. And so, like in situations like that, it's more like, okay, well, we don't have to take this away, but let's use the forecasting methods of looking at throughput and running these models to say, how does that compare with how your estimates came out from a story pointing perspective? And then run those in parallel for a while until the team either says, we're going to stay like this, or we're going to do both. But it's kind of like, instead of it being a one or the other, it's a one and.
Yes, and is one of my
Yeah.
favorite tools.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. With all the work that you've done with teams, what do you believe has most impacted your ability to achieve what you have?
Um, Honestly, probably motherhood, which I know is kind of a weird answer. But I think we're seeing a lot right now of emotion in the agile space because our identities are so wrapped up in our roles. And as we're seeing a lot of disruption and shift from whether or not scrum masters are valuable or agile coaches are valuable in this space, there's a lot of like almost infighting. It feels like there's a lot of angst. And it's like, if you say something wrong, I'm going to yell at you on LinkedIn. because I feel maybe personally threatened because my identity is so attached to that specific role. And I think maybe becoming a mother made me detach from that a little bit more so that, I was in a lot of ways, I guess maybe it's harder to ruffle my feathers because I feel like there's other things for me that are more important in my life than just being a coach or a trainer or a scrum master, whatever that role might be. So I know it's probably an unconventional answer, but I think it just shifted my priorities a lot. And it makes you also, I think, probably acutely aware for other people how much else they may have going on. I can think back to moments in my 20s where I was very headstrong, very stubborn, probably pushing a lot of people without thinking about what they might have going on for them as soon as they walk out of the office. And I think that's one of the things that's easy to forget. And it's, you never know what's going on for other people. So I think that helps. My family helps me keep that in perspective.
Have you found techniques for helping teams become more aware of everything else that's going on for everyone else?
I know. That's a hard thing to do. I've used tools like empathy mapping before. I think when things have gotten really intense for a team, I had a team one time that was really butting heads with their product owner. And with her permission, we did an empathy map as a group to talk about what she might be hearing, feeling, seeing, thinking. But I didn't want to do it without her in the room. And I said, this is going to be weird. Like, we're going to have a conversation about you, but I want you to be in the room with us. But I want you to hear what the team thinks is going on for you so that you can weigh in afterwards and say, that's spot on. That's exactly, I'm feeling pressure from the customers to deliver on time. But what I'm actually thinking about is how do we break these into smaller batches, not why aren't you guys delivering, right? And so I think those can be helpful exercises, but it's going to depend a lot on the willingness of the team to have difficult conversations. And I think when we start thinking about things like that, like what's going on for other people, there's a level of vulnerability required to be able to open up and first of all share, but also a willingness to listen to each other and understand. And that can be when tensions are high. I feel like those are the first things that we typically stop doing well.
When teams aren't ready to listen at that level, at that vulnerability, what can we do to help ameliorate the situation?
Yeah. Um, I feel like I've seen a lot of different things tried here, external, like bringing in a facilitator from outside the team or outside the company or team building retreats. But I feel, you know what I mean? Like, I think some of those things don't actually address what's going on for folks. I think it can help sometimes to get a team away from work and get to know each other outside of a work setting, which gets harder, as we add remote work to our lives. But um, I think sometimes having a chance to maybe escalate or vent the things that your team is struggling with without having to do it face to face can be more comfortable for some people. So having a way to capture that feedback in a method where it can be maybe mixed together and reviewed offline can also be helpful. And that's where I think, retros, surveys, things like that, I think can be really good at making sure that you're giving everybody a chance to be heard in a way where they feel comfortable communicating or comfortable sharing that feedback.
In all the work that you've done, what's the biggest red flag you found of what's going on here is not okay?
Yeah, that's a tough one for me to answer. I feel like my mind is going to some leadership dysfunction, I guess. And back to what you said about mandates. Um, I think some of the most successful companies I've seen from an agile perspective and healthy teams perspective give their teams a certain amount of autonomy, but frame the box well with here's what's expected, right? Here's the expectations. We're going to shape the box or frame the box with, and inside that box, you're free to pick how you work, how you do stand-ups, how often you come into the office, but here's the expectations we have as an organization that still need to be met. Maybe that's reporting, or maybe that's visibility into the, what's getting delivered. There can be a lot of different things there, but I think organizations where I've seen them have really strict mandates all the way down to, throughput, for example, or, things that are going to be a lot harder for them to control without teams maybe taking some questionable steps to do that. That's what you see, right? You see the output reflects the requirement. I always think of that Wells Fargo example where the Wells Fargo employees were opening checking accounts for other people because they were incentivized to how they, to open more accounts. And so it's like, if we're going to incentivize teams to hit a certain throughput target, we're probably going to see the quality of work deployed go down, or we're going to see that the stories aren't completely usable pieces of functionality. So I think we have to be careful with the things that we decide are required for teams and try to give them a certain amount of autonomy, but really frame that box so that they understand what's inside of their control and maybe what the expectations are across the whole organization and why.
How do you explain the business value of doing that when managers, directors, VPs, whomever don't get it? They know what they think needs to be done, and they don't understand why this different approach might be useful.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it is often at that level less about maybe the value of what we're delivering and more about the cost of losing people. If you can quantify for an organization how much they spend acquiring and retaining talent, I think that's a great place to start that conversation, right? You spend all this time and money to get the right people on these teams, and you're going to lose them. Everybody's trying to hire brilliant people to help deliver value. And if you take away their ability to do creative work, whatever that looks like for that team, and give them the autonomy about how they deliver work, they're going to go somewhere else. And so that might be a little harder right now with the economy being stretched thin in a lot of spaces, but I think that's a great way to get leadership's attention, is to make sure they know that people won't stick around without that opportunity to be creative.
Yeah. We started with your biggest struggle. What would you say has been your biggest win?
I would say my biggest win to date, and especially around, I guess, building strong teams, has been the team we've pulled together at Pro Kanban. Very early in the process, we were working closely with an advisor from scrum.org, and he said very early in the process, you have a diversity problem forming here, and it's going to be a lot harder to fix it when you have 400 trainers than when you have 40. And so we pulled together and created a scholarship program for women in Kanban. We've run 3 cohorts of that so far, and it's been an amazing experience, not just for the women that go through, but for us, like teaching and getting to help mentor and help them kind of build this other career path for themselves has been incredible to watch and support. We're about to launch our first entirely Spanish-speaking cohort. That'll start in December here. And so those kind of things, I think, are really powerful, not just from how it looks on paper, right? Sure, it's great. We have more women and more diversity in our trainer community. But when we first set out to build Pro Kanban, one of the things we were really trying to do was to kind of chip away at the old guard a little bit. I think in the agile community, we have a tendency to, there's certain voices we hear from all the time. It's the same speakers, it's the same writers, it's the same authors. And if we really genuinely want to build a strong learning community, that means also learning from the people that are new, right? Not just the people that have been doing this a long time. And so I'm really excited because I think what we've built here is maybe a team, but it's a big team, right? We've got over 100 trainers now, but we have people all over the world coming together on these Slack conversations to talk about things like this, right? Like, how do I bring change to my leadership team, or how do I convince a team to try WIP limits? And you're hearing from people who've been coaching Kanban for 20 years, or part of the original Kanban teams. And you're also hearing from people who are brand new to their roles, what's worked and not worked for them. And I think that's a pretty incredible place to be. And I'm proud that we've been able to create space for so many different voices and perspectives.
It's fabulous that you have that environment to participate and also learn from.
Yeah, I love it.
This has been a great conversation today, Colleen. What else should I ask you?
Well, I would say, when we're thinking about teams, I guess a question I would always ask is our team actually a team, or is our team a team because of the org chart? And I'm seeing this get challenged more and more, and it makes me really happy. I was just part of a Kanban training course for a security org where we were trying to map out, the activities that work went through. So a request comes in, what steps does it go through? And by the end of this session, we had all 3 teams back in the room going, well, I guess it goes from me to this team to that team. Well, maybe we're just one big team. Maybe we're not 3 small teams. And I think we have a tendency to be so rigid in our team, what we consider a team, based off of the org chart or based off siloed roles and specialties, instead of taking a step back and thinking about how we deliver value together. And I've been seeing a lot of chatter about that in LinkedIn lately, and it makes me really happy because it's kind of challenging us to think about how we work together in a different way.
It's on the how and not the infrastructure or chart.
Yeah.
For people who would like to learn more about Kanban and bringing change effectively and everything else we talked about today, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
I am probably the easiest to find in the Pro Kanban Slack channel. That can be, anyone can join the Slack community. There is a link to join at prokanban.org under the About Us tab. And that community is 1,000 plus and growing strong. So if you're interested in joining there or just reaching out to me there, that's a great place to start. I'm also available on LinkedIn. I am on Twitter. I'm probably a little less active than I used to be for lots of reasons, but probably the most active on LinkedIn these days.
You have a YouTube channel as well, correct?
We do, yeah. We have a YouTube channel for Pro Kanban with a few different threads there. There's a playlist with videos about the Kanban guide and getting familiar with the Kanban guide. And then we do a monthly series called Kanban for Everyone. There's some really great, probably my favorite one that's out there, if I'm allowed to pick a favorite, there's a interview we did last year with folks who are applying Kanban for nonprofits. I think the title of it is Kanban for NGOs, but really fascinating interview with Marcus Hammerberg and Steve Bell about the work that they've done using Kanban really out in the field to help nonprofits who are strapped for money, strapped for resources, and still have a lot of work to get done, help manage how they're delivering. So that's a really great episode, but we talk about Kanban application across a variety of industries, also Kanban application inside of other practices like Scrum and SAFe. So you can check out our interview series there and subscribe for future episodes.
Sounds great. And I'll have all those links in the show notes.
Awesome.
What would you like to leave our audience with today?
I think the big thing in my mind is thinking about respect for people, right? I think understanding where your teammates are coming from, whatever that looks like, if it's giving them space, not starting new work, but really, there's people behind everything we do. Even though I'm kind of a data nerd, there's people doing this work. And I think especially right now when a lot of organizations are making cuts, stress is high. The workload is probably the same and there's fewer people to get it done. And so everybody's feeling that pressure and that pain. And so I think respecting our peers becomes an even bigger value proposition to make sure that we're all working together.
100%. Thank you, Colleen, for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you, audience, for joining us today. Please let Colleen and I know, how is Kanban and whatever other methodologies you're using working for you? Where are they falling down? How can we help you make them better? We want to know. Thanks and have a great day. Thanks for joining us on Uncommon Leadership today. If you found these stories interesting, inspiring, and illuminating, sign up for my newsletter. Hop over to uncommonteams.com and use the form at the top of every page. You'll be the first to know about every new episode of Uncommon Leadership. You'll also discover how you can build uncommon teams. If you'd like to chat about doing that yourself, email me, michael@uncommonteams.com, or use the contact form on my website. Thanks so much.